Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we are going to be previewing Simone Fontecchio's second season with the Detroit Pistons. But before we get into that, I'm your host, Jack Kelly. You can follow me on all social media platforms at Pistons_Jack. And if you're feeling so kind, please hit that subscribe button. We are literally less than a month away from opening night, and preseason games are less than a week away. So we're going to have everything here. Some cool announcements coming this week about the channel. So I would appreciate any support. But as I mentioned, today we are previewing the season of Simone Fontecchio. And before we get into that, just quickly, how these previews work is I'll go through a quick recap of last season for the player. Then we'll talk about the predicted role I have for this player for the upcoming season. We'll talk about an area for improvement or an area of question, and then we'll round it out with a hot take. So to begin things here, Simone Fontecchio, when we think about his season with the Pistons last year, he was acquired by Troy Weaver at the deadline last year in kind of a last gasp effort to turn the season around. And while a lot of Troy Weaver's moves can be critiqued, I would go as far to say, in terms of trades or player acquisitions, Simone Fontecchio was one of Weaver's best. As you can see here, when Fontecchio got to the Pistons, he only played 16 games, but in those 16 games, as you can see here, 15 points, 4.5 boards, couple of assists, 48% from the field, 43% from three. And that was on 6 attempts. So he made a sizable impact on this team. And he came, I think his first game off the top of my head from memory was against the Clippers when the Pistons had just began their kind of West Coast road trip through the California teams. And Fontecchio came off the bench and dropped 20 points. I remember it pretty clearly now. And, the Pistons' best stretch of the season where they almost beat the Clippers. I think they beat the Trailblazers. They had some really close games against some other Western Conference teams. They came with Fontecchio in the lineup. And we'll get to some lineup data in a minute here. But Fontecchio's, how can I say this? He was awesome for the Pistons last season. It was absolutely awesome. And the fact Detroit got him back on a 2-year, $18 million deal feels like too good to be true. That seems like below market value. I feel like a lot of us thought he'd be in the neighborhood of maybe like 2 years, 30 million, or 3 years, 45 million. Honestly, maybe even more for a guy that, as you can see those numbers here at 6'8", shot the ball like that. Just adding, the biggest issue with the Pistons last season was none of their players did anything two-way, like their role players. Like you had Bogdanovic, who could shoot the hell out of the ball, couldn't defend anyone. Joe Harris kind of couldn't do anything at that stage of his career. But theoretically, even Joe Harris, he was brought in just as a shooter, but defensively was a nightmare. Then they had Asar Thompson, elite defender, but can't space the floor at all. He's the guy you don't have to defend at all. They just had so many players on the wing. Isaiah Livers, who was theoretically meant to be a 3-and-D wing, just couldn't ever find any rhythm with the team. So when they added Fontecchio, not only did Fontecchio play great, but the reason some of these numbers I'm going to lay out to you in a minute eventuated is just because they had a wing that could shoot and hold their own defensively. Like just adding a guy like that into the lineup was a major reason they were able to beat teams like the Bulls on the road. And it really helped Cade play some of his best basketball post All-Star break. Like that was because a guy like Fontecchio was in the lineup. And if we look at here, I've gone to NBA.com. Anyone can go look at this in the lineup data. I've gone and looked at the Pistons' most used lineups last season. So they had so much roster changed throughout last season that the Pistons' top used lineups only played like 140 minutes. So I think that shows kind of why they were so bad last season. Is just because they never settled. They didn't have one 5-man lineup that really worked for a sustained amount of time. But the Pistons' two best lineups featured Simone Fontecchio. The first one played 113 minutes, which was the second most of any 5-man combination. And that lineup was Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, Asar Thompson, and Simone Fontecchio. So really, the core four plus Fontecchio, and they were a plus 3.8 in terms of net rating per 100 possessions. So when that five was on the court, the Pistons are winning those minutes. Now, only 113 minutes. 100 minutes is a decent sample size, but that was against probably teams post All-Star break, which there's lots of factors, but I think the fact that their core four with Fontecchio was a positive is a huge plus. The other lineup, the second best Pistons lineup, featured Fontecchio once again, and that was the lineup of Isaiah Stewart, Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, Jalen Durant, and Fontecchio. So that was a plus 8.9 per 100 possessions. So not to get too analytical, but that lineup there played 90 minutes, the fourth most. So they're two best lineups by far that actually played some substantial amount of minutes, featured Fontecchio. And like I said, a lot of that was because of his play. Like, I'm kind of not expecting these numbers from Fontecchio this season. I'll touch on it a little bit in the hot take, but just with the extra shooting they've added and where players are in their career, I expect these numbers he had in these 16 games to dip a bit. But just adding a guy that, like I said, can shoot and hold their own defensively and create, not really create a shot, but shoot a little bit off the dribble and do some relocation stuff. Like, it opened up so much for the Pistons' young core, and it kind of shows how bad the roster build was last year, which we all know. But and that should also give us some hope for like the Pistons adding a guy like Tobias Harris. Tobias Harris, in my opinion, is kind of just a better version of Fontecchio. Like, not a better shooter maybe, but a very similar mold of like they're a bigger wing. Fontecchio might be a bit better defensively, a bit quicker, but like they're just a big body, 6'8", 6'9" guy that can shoot and create a little bit off the bounce. And you can see there from those lineups with the Pistons young core just how much it really opens things up. So that's enough on last season. As I mentioned, the Pistons ended up re-signing Fontecchio for 2 years, $18 million. And I believe Fontecchio did that, a shorter term deal, to try and, I believe he can unlock something in 2 years where he can sign a bigger deal. I'm not a cap expert, but regardless, 2 years, $80 million is a bargain. Moving on, predicted role for this season. This is very quick. If you've been listening to me and following my content, Fontecchio is a lock to start for me. I'm not sure if that's what JB Bickerstaff thinks, but for me, Fontecchio is your starting three, man, because of the shooting, because of the scoring ability, because of he's one of the only guys on this roster that can be a plus offensively and not a negative defensively. I think he's crucial, and it's why I titled the video, he'll be key to any success, because he's pretty much the only kind of guy that's close to a two-way player. Now, we all hope Asar Thompson gets there. Ron Holland, in theory, can get there. Tobias Harris, we hope, might be a bit better defensively. But in terms of like what we know from last season, Fontecchio is a Pistons' best two-way player. And to be honest, unless like you could put Cade in that sentence, but I just think with the load Cade's going to carry offensively, I just don't think this season like he's going to be at that level defensively. Like, it's kind of just Fontecchio, then a notch down. Like, Asar's obviously better defensively, but offensively, he's got so far to go that it's hard to say he's a good two-way player right now. So that's why he starts for me. He's the Pistons' best two-way option. He shoots the hell out of the ball. That lineup that I presented to you, he fit in perfectly with the core four last year in the Pistons' young pieces. I think it's a bit of a no-brainer. But if he's not a starter, I think he should be six-man. So I'd love to know your thoughts. I know a lot of people want to start Thompson starting, but for me, Fontecchio is just like, I think he has to start. Like, unless he's struggling to shoot, like if his shooting dips to like 35%, then yeah, I can, you can make some changes. But I just think if he shoots 38% plus on like 5 attempts a game, like, he's a starter for me, what he brings at the other areas of the floor. Moving on. Biggest area for improvement. Now, this is tricky because Fontecchio, as you can see, he is like 28 years old. So he's kind of a known finished product. Like, not fully finished, but like he's not like these younger pieces we've discussed where there's a lot for them to improve upon. They're kind of who they are at this stage of their career. So for me, I kind of went down like the biggest question / thing I want to see from Fontecchio this season is just, can he keep up the shooting and the productivity in potentially a lesser role? Now, obviously, he's going to start, but in terms of minutes, he played 31 minutes with the Pistons last season. I just don't see that happening. I think he's more in that 25 to 28-minute range. Now, 3 minutes taken off to 5 minutes might not seem like a lot, but I think what becomes very difficult for shooters is like, and what separates elite shooters from like just good shooters is shooters that can just like in a lesser role come in and just knock down shots. Now, even if Fontecchio starts, kind of the same thing applies. Can he, on maybe a little less shots and less minutes, still shoot the ball at that rate? Because that's going to be key. Like, I've spoken about kind of the all-round game he brings, but if he's not shooting close to 40% or more, like Fontecchio's value is nowhere near where it is when he is. So the biggest thing for me is, can he, sustain those shooting percentages on potentially less field goal attempts and less minutes? So I'd like to know your thoughts on this, though. Like, I could say some stuff defensively, but I thought he was pretty solid defensively for the Pistons last season. Playmaking, I don't think it's going to be a huge area for him. Like 1.8 assists seems decent to me, just on low turnovers. I thought he was pretty good at like creating, like attacking closeouts off the bounce last year. So maybe improve there a little bit, maybe add more of a float game. But, for me, it's just sustaining those percentages on potentially a lesser role. Now, to close it out here, hot takes. This is a weird one. I kind of just thought, you know what? Hot takes, he's the Pistons' third leading scorer. Like, I think I might even said this for Jaden Ivey. Maybe I said Ivey for second leading scorer. That would make sense. But I think Fontecchio being the Pistons' third leading scorer is somewhat of a hot take. He's a guy that's averaged like 9 points in his career. So 15.5 points with the Pistons last season was well above his average, albeit in very limited games there. But if he can, like, I think if like there's a world where if the Pistons are pushing for the play-in, like, I just think Simone Fontecchio is going to play a really key role, and I could see him averaging 15 to 16 points a game and being that third leading scorer. I think if he's the third leading scorer, that means Cade's first, and then Ivy or Tobias is second, and then Ivy or Tobias is fourth. So I think for Fontecchio to average more than one of Ivy or Harris would probably be a bit of not a shock, but I think it is a bit of a hot take. And I think there is a world where that happens. Just if he's shooting the ball at 43% from three again, like, he's going to be playing a heap of minutes because of that stuff he can bring defensively. I think JB Bickerstaff will love that defensive side of the ball. Defensive stuff that Fontecchio brings sort of matches with JB. So I think there's a world he's that third leading scorer because he becomes a key guy and a player that Bickerstaff relies on. And maybe he plays more than that 25 minutes a game, like I just said. Maybe he still keeps up that 30 to 32 minutes like he did last season because of that trust in Bickerstaff and his shooting. And, I could see that getting him to 16 points a night. I think overall, the scoring on this team, like, I think Cade's probably going to give you 23, max 25 a game. I'd love it to be more, but I think realistically with the amount of shooting on this team, Cade's around 23 to 4 points a night. And then I think Ivy or Harris, one of those two is going to average between 18 and 20. And then I think that's where Fontecchio can come in if he's to be the third leading scorer. But that's my hot take. Not the spiciest, but I think it's a hot take nonetheless. That's going to do it for today's show, guys. Tomorrow is, or by the time you're watching this morning for me, sorry, my time zone's all out of whack, but Media Day is tomorrow. I'll be back with a full recap of that, and then we'll keep churning out these player previews. And I believe the Pistons' first preseason game is in exactly a week's time, so can't wait to actually break down some Pistons game footage and have some real stuff to talk about. It's been a long off season, but appreciate everyone sticking with me. And until next video, as always, go Pistons.